What if you were forced to retire because you stood up for what you believed in and that caught you up in the crossfire? What if you're in the 50s? Or what if there's a major organizational change and your department just gets caught? Well, this happens all too often. And quite often, many people out there struggle with when to retire, when to quit, when to leave their organization, but it's not always on your terms. And myself, as many other people out there, find themselves caught up in these kind of world, this environment, where you plan to retire, you have your number, maybe it's 60, 62, 65, whatever that number is, which I think coincidentally is way too late. But ideally, most people have a number, a thought, where they target like to go for a goal for retirement or leave. But way too often these days, with competitive marketplaces, with people undercutting and undermining your efforts, with organizations looking to look for the bottom line and ultimately seeking the best, most competitive numbers. You know, the pursuit of ultimate dollars and the obsolescence of the worker are something that we're seeing at an alarming rate. Welcome back to the hustle, everybody, and welcome back to the grind. And let's just talk about something like this. For example, you know, I left here about a year and a half ago, and the question was, did I leave on my terms? And quite often, a lot of people don't necessarily leave on their terms. Sometimes the target, sometimes your number is not necessarily the number you're looking for. In many cases, my final thoughts are thinking back what this is all about. The time that I wanted to leave looked more like 55, 56. I looked at, all my numbers. I kind of had all my calculations figured out. And even from the perspective of, thinking of even my youngest child, who's actually going to be technically entering adulthood in about another year. And so ideally, the projected date for me was finding that date once he became an adult, and then technically, all my young ones could potentially fend for themselves. We all have our dates. Whatever that date is, whether it's you're trying to build up your pension, whether it's you're trying to get, your kids, you want to, save up, pay for weddings, pay for activities, maybe finish off some schooling for them. They're going to university. A lot of people continue working, trying to achieve certain goals. I had goals just like that. I know we have some weddings coming up. It would have been nice to have some of that extra cash on hand. It would have been nice to, again, keep working at least until my son made the 18-year mark. And then you could technically say, now it's ready for retirement and we can pretty much set off and, he's going to be independent, as are the rest of the kids, and life's going to be grand. But it doesn't always work out like that. And, I can't help but wonder how many people out there, and I'd like, if you don't mind, dropping something down in the comment section. If you got cut short, you had a longer projected end date in terms of when you wanted to retire, but you either got fired, let go, reorged out, or just forced into retirement. I worked with numerous people, a couple specifics that I can't help but think, they kept putting off year after year, thinking, okay, you know what, I'm gonna do another year. I'm gonna do another year. I'm gonna do another year. And this conversations kept going on. And unfortunately, see, this is where getting forced out sometimes is almost like when you think of the analogy, a baby bird gets pushed out of the nest. Eventually they have to fly on their own. They have to use their own wings, and they have to find their own way to feed themselves. I worked with people that just couldn't pull it together, couldn't find the energy to actually force themselves to retire. It was almost like they were waiting for somebody to push them out. And well, there's some organizations that will do that. Some organizations will pay you to leave, technically, and some people play games and allow the company to just lollygag around and wait until that day comes, and then they get the, what they say, the golden handshake. But some people just don't know what to do with themselves. Some people love being king of the castle. Some people like to be the boss at work, and some people just like to be busy. Some people just relish in that networking at work. Some people just relish in having some place to go and a reason to get there. Some people relish in having that motivation to get up at 5:30 in the morning, hurry up, get that hair done, get your dressed, tidy yourself up, jump in your car, race to work, and having that day in, day out, that thing that you've been doing for the last 35 years? Yes, the reason to exist. And that's the problem. A lot of people, when they get into retirement, feel that that reason to exist no longer happens. They no longer really have motivation to go anywhere, do anything. They're not even sure what they're going to do with themselves. Now, quite frankly, I've never regretted a moment. And the fact that I was the baby bird getting pushed out of the nest, I feel like, looking back in retrospect, it was absolutely one of the best things that could have ever happened. And quite honestly, all I can do at this point is truly thank the organization for what they did. Now, I know sometimes you get into these conversations and I talk about the idea about retiring early or quitting early, or the FIRE movement. I'm not a big fan of necessarily, because I think there is an element of not just paying your dues. Really, it's not about paying your dues. It's building enough of that nest egg and support structure financially and build up those resources to help you sustain it long enough. So however that looks, everybody's got their own target and their own dates. And while on one hand, I, like many others who get pushed out maybe a little prematurely, possibly you didn't quite make your target for certain dates. Again, I had some dates in mind, probably another couple of years, a year and a half, and probably would have been right on the money for me. But even getting pushed out a little bit early sort of forces the hand, because these people that I've known that kept pushing off year over year over year over year, eventually they themselves got pushed out. The worst part is a couple of them hung around long enough to finally get pushed out, nudged out under similar circumstances as a reorganization or some other structural change, company making some major changes, of course, and time to move, as they say, the old dog's out and the new dog's in. But the downside is they kept putting this off and off and off and off, to the point where a couple of them that I know that finally waited for that day, for the organization to tap them on the shoulder and say, enough is enough. They finally took the papers, they walked, and sadly, two of them barely made a year and they passed. So what this is to me is a message. Sometimes I truly believe, and we all talk about fate and we said everything happens for a reason. I truly do believe, in a lot of ways, everything in fact does happen for a reason. There's a reason you got let go. Has to do maybe to help you explore other avenues. Maybe your mental health wasn't that amazing. Maybe you're struggling in other ways, maybe physically, maybe the lifestyle was hurting your body, and maybe you just need a change. Maybe your spouse wasn't really seeing the best of you coming home every day, complaining about your job. Maybe all these things happen for a reason. And when we talk about, my final impressions and my final thoughts about it not necessarily being up to you or me, the conversation really more is about, not about, oh, woe is me and why does this keep happening to me? And it should be more a conversation about, all right, well, now we're on to another opportunity. Now we've found another situation where we have another chance to restart and relight our fire and refigure out what we want to do and kind of make a start of the third sector of our lives. The first one being, of course, being a young person, enjoying friends and school, deciding what you want to do for work. The second phase, moving on to a space where you're in your work that you finally selected and you're grinding, you're building a life, you're enjoying, you're building family, you're building a small nest egg, and you're building that over a course of 30, 40 years. And then your final sector could be any number of things. This is the beauty. Some people look at it as an opportunity to sit around and stare at the walls and watch the paint dry and smell the roses. And other people look at it as an opportunity. Maybe start a small business, maybe a little side hustle. Maybe now it gives me more time to spend with, my kids and up and coming, hopefully, grandkids, and, some of the things that they enjoy doing, and spending more time going out for a coffee, having talks, a little bit more of those heart to heart that was grossly missed back in the day. See, because when you're working, when you're grinding and you're hustling and you're moving and shaking, it's great. I mean, we feel busy, we feel like we're adding value to an organization, we feel like we're adding value to lives of people around us, like our friends and our family, but the real value comes in when you actively listen to people, when you're there for them. It's not necessarily showing up with a big wad of cash and saying, hey, there's the paycheck, I'm bringing home the bacon, because we all know that you kind of need to survive these days. That's, we can't romanticize the fact that you still need to work, you still need to generate money and revenue, but there is a reality. Because life is short, because we're not here forever, think of all those little moments that you can spend now. Starts right here, right now, with your family. Maybe that friend you haven't talked to for a while, maybe reach out. Maybe your son, maybe your daughter, take them out for a coffee, have a chat. Listen to them, ask them what's on their mind these days. These are all great opportunities now to enrich in your life. But see, if you're grinding it out at your job and you plan to work, and maybe your company does, let you fall through the cracks and you manage to work till you're 67 years of age, can you imagine the difference between 67 and 60? That's 7 years of those little conversations, 7 years of chit-chats, 7 years of random golf games, 7 years of going for a cruise in my hot rod, 7 years of creating little side hustles and other opportunities that themselves can make money. See, life is a journey, and life isn't about the destination. It's about all the little things you do along the way. And from my perspective, instead of being, bitter Bob and stressing out about the fact that the company let you go a little earlier, I always like to think about things in a positive light, because now it offers you an opportunity to move on to another part of your life. And for me, this is a new part of my life. I'm loving every single day. And so when we think about what is it about when you're essentially forced to retire or fired, and it's not really time, you feel you're not really ready. The best thing I can say is I wasn't ready either. Not really. Mentally, emotionally, I was ready, because I was going through such, you talk about a lot of organizations carry values like safety, integrity, even inclusion and things like that. But the sad part is a lot of those weren't there. There was more of exclusion. Integrity had to get thrown out the window, which that's coincidentally, when you stand up for what you believe in, sometimes puts you above the clouds, and then you get nipped off at the knees. And that's how I feel in some ways that what happened in my case. But ultimately, enjoy it. Look at it as another opportunity to expand on your life. Anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. If you were cut off short as well, like I was, and you see it positively, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Hope you all have a wonderful day, everybody.